And in the corner to my right, from Lexington, Tennessee, weighing 225 pounds, it is Eddie Gilbert.
First of all, I'm not trying to make Jerry the King Lawler sound old. When I was growing up, Jerry Lawler just happened to be my idol. I'd always want to grow up and be just like Jerry the King Lawler. And as I was growing up, and more that I got older, and the more and more it got closer and time came for me to be a professional wrestler, well, then I started realizing for me to be the king like Jerry Lawler, I'd have to beat the king.
Pro wrestling's always been wild, but Eddie Gilbert, he took it to another level. This guy was like a magnet for controversy, both inside and outside the ring. We're talking fights, arrests, and a tragic death that made the wrestling world cry. Eddie Gilbert was one of those wrestlers who had both talent and controversy following him everywhere. He wasn't just another guy in the business. He had skills, charisma, and a deep love for professional wrestling. But along with the cheers and admiration, his career was also marked by incidents that kept his name in the headlines for all the wrong reasons. To give you all some context, in the early 1980s, Eddie Gilbert was making a name for himself in professional wrestling. He had the look, the athleticism, and a passion that made people believe he was destined for greatness. He was young, energetic, and had the kind of drive that made fans take notice. But then, in 1983, just as his career was starting to take off, life threw him a massive curveball. A serious car accident changed everything for him. The crash left him with devastating injuries, the kind that make people wonder if they'll ever walk properly again, let alone wrestle. But Eddie wasn't the type to back down from a fight, even outside the ring. He pushed through grueling rehabilitation, worked day and night to regain his strength, and refused to let the setback define his future. And just when it seemed like his perseverance was paying off, he found himself caught in the middle of one of the most controversial storylines in wrestling history. At the time, Eddie was working with the World Wrestling Federation. He was starting to gain traction, building a name for himself, and then came a moment that would leave the wrestling world divided. During a match, he went up against the Masked Superstar, a powerful and well-respected wrestler. The match itself was intense, but what happened next was what really shocked everyone. The Masked Superstar delivered a devastating move, one so brutal that, according to the script, Eddie was left with a broken neck. It was a powerful, dramatic moment. Eddie lay motionless in the ring as officials rushed to his side. The audience sat in stunned silence as he was placed on a stretcher and carried out of the arena, loaded into an ambulance and taken away. The whole scene felt real, too real. Fans watching in the arena and at home genuinely believed they had just witnessed a career-ending injury. But here's the thing. Eddie had just recovered from a real-life car accident that had left him seriously injured, and now the company was using a similar storyline for dramatic effect. To some, it was an incredible piece of storytelling, the kind of thing that made wrestling feel like an emotional roller coaster. But to others, it was in extremely poor taste. Many felt that exploiting someone's real-life tragedy for the sake of a storyline was crossing a line. Fans debated whether it was brilliant or just plain wrong. Regardless of where people stood on the issue, one thing was certain. This storyline made Eddie Gilbert a hot topic in the wrestling world. It was his first major controversy, but it wouldn't be his last. Then came another infamous incident in 1988, this time involving Bill Watts, a powerful figure in the wrestling world and the booker for the Universal Wrestling Federation. Watts was known for being tough, old school, and strict when it came to running a wrestling promotion. Gilbert, on the other hand, had a strong personality and wasn't afraid to voice his opinions. This eventually led to a heated backstage altercation between the two. Details of the fight aren't that clear, depending on who tells the story, but it was serious enough to cause Gilbert to leave the company. Some insiders say that the argument was about creative decisions, while others claim it was about personal disagreements. Whatever the case, it added to Gilbert's reputation as someone who was talented but difficult to work with. Some promoters hesitated to hire him, fearing that he might clash with management or create trouble behind the scenes. Things took an even darker turn in 1991 when Gilbert found himself in legal trouble. By this time, he had been wrestling in Puerto Rico for the World Wrestling Council. Wrestling in Puerto Rico was known for its passionate fans, but sometimes things got out of hand. One night, Gilbert was involved in a violent altercation with a fan. The details remain unclear, but what is clear is that the situation escalated quickly and Gilbert was arrested. This incident seriously hurt his reputation. The wrestling business has always had its fair share of wild stories, but getting into a physical altercation with a fan crossed the line. As a result, Gilbert was let go from the WWC, and his career suffered another major blow. People started questioning whether he was becoming too much of a liability. Eddie Gilbert's career was filled with moments of brilliance, but it was also overshadowed by controversy. Some see him as a misunderstood genius, while others remember him as a talented wrestler who couldn't escape controversy. Either way, his legacy remains a fascinating part of professional wrestling history. Beyond the ring, Gilbert's personal life was just as crazy as his career. His relationships, particularly his marriages, were marked by struggles and controversies. His first marriage didn't last long. Many believe his obsession with wrestling played a big role in its downfall. Some say he was so fixated on Jerry Lawler, his wrestling idol, that he even chose his first wife because she resembled Lawler's wife at the time. There were also whispers of infidelity, though nothing was ever confirmed. Either way, the marriage ended in divorce, leaving Gilbert with another emotional scar to carry. Then came his relationship with Missy Hyatt. Man, it was a fiery romance that burned bright, but also burned out fast. Their marriage was anything but peaceful. Hyatt has spoken openly about Gilbert's controlling behavior, jealousy, and even physical abuse. The relationship was volatile, and their divorce was messy in public. It was around this time that Gilbert's struggles with substance abuse became more apparent, making an already bad situation worse. Gilbert's issues with drugs and alcohol started early. Some say he began experimenting in his teens, and as he climbed the ranks in wrestling, his habits only worsened. The pressures of constant travel, the rough wrestling lifestyle, and the easy access to substances all contributed to his downward spiral. His addiction didn't just affect his health, it impacted his career. Mood swings, erratic behavior, and financial instability followed him wherever he went. He missed opportunities, alienated promoters, and gained a reputation for being unreliable. Many believe that if he had stayed clean, he could have reached even greater heights in the industry. Gilbert's struggles also led to run-ins with the law. He was arrested multiple times for driving under the influence and drug possession. These incidents further tarnished his reputation and made it even harder for him to find steady work in wrestling. Despite all his talent and contributions to wrestling, Eddie Gilbert's life was filled with struggles. His personal demons, controversial decisions, and troubled relationships kept him from truly reaching the top. In 1995, at just 33 years old, he passed away due to a heart attack, likely by years of substance abuse. His story is one of potential, brilliance, and self-destruction. Some remember him as a wrestling mastermind, others as a troubled soul who couldn't escape his own worst tendencies. Either way, Eddie Gilbert's name remains etched in wrestling history, both for his incredible mind for the business and the controversies that followed him to the very end. Speaking of coming to the end, we should also not forget how it all started. This is his story from the very start. When no controversy ever touched him, Eddie Gilbert grew up in a home where wrestling was more than just a sport, it was a way of life. His father, Tommy Gilbert, was a well-known professional wrestler, and Eddie idolized him from a young age. Watching his father compete in the ring, he dreamed of following in his footsteps. By the time he was in the second grade, Eddie was already certain that he wanted to become a professional wrestler when he grew up. His love for wrestling was so strong that he wanted to be involved in any way possible. Even before he stepped into the ring, he started writing articles and taking photographs for wrestling magazines. This gave him a chance to stay close to the wrestling world, learn more about the industry, and build connections. In 1977, after finishing high school, Eddie took his first step toward making his dream a reality. He officially began wrestling for the Continental Wrestling Association, a well-known wrestling company based in Memphis, Tennessee. To honor his father's legacy, he started wrestling under the name Tommy Gilbert Jr. His dedication and hard work soon paid off. In 1980, he experienced his first major success when he teamed up with his father to win the American Wrestling Association Southern Tag Team Championship. This victory was not just a professional achievement, but also a deeply personal moment for him and his family. Eddie's growing talent and passion for wrestling soon caught the attention of a much larger organization, the World Wrestling Federation. He joined the company in 1982 and was introduced to fans as a young and promising wrestler under the mentorship of World Wrestling Federation champion Bob Backlund. Eddie worked tirelessly to prove himself in the competitive world of professional wrestling. His determination and skill quickly made him a fan favorite, and he gained the admiration of many wrestling enthusiasts. However, Eddie's journey was not without hardship. In May 1983, his career took a devastating turn when he was involved in a serious car accident. The crash left him with severe injuries to his neck, arms, chest, and back. The damage was so extensive that some doctors believed he might never be able to wrestle again. It was a crushing moment for Eddie, who had dedicated his entire life to the sport, but he refused to give up. Determined to return to the ring, he underwent surgery and fought through an intense recovery process. As a way to conceal the scars on his face from the accident, he grew a beard. His resilience paid off when, just 3 months later, in August 1983, he made an incredible comeback. His return to wrestling was seen as a remarkable achievement, proving his strength and dedication to the sport. Unfortunately, his struggles were not over. During a match, another wrestler known as the Masked Superstar attacked Eddie, injuring his already fragile neck once again. Although this incident was part of a scripted storyline in wrestling, it made his real-life injury even harder to endure. Despite these setbacks, Eddie continued wrestling, determined not to let his injuries define him. After leaving the World Wrestling Federation, Eddie Gilbert returned to Memphis and rejoined the Continental Wrestling Association, the same wrestling company where he had started his career. This time, he decided to wrestle under the name Eddie Gilbert instead of using his father's name. As he settled back into the Memphis wrestling scene, Eddie teamed up with another well-known wrestler, Tommy Rich. Together, they formed a tag team called Fargo's Fabulous Ones. This team was created to replace another popular duo that had left the company, so they had big shoes to fill. In 1984, Eddie and Tommy proved themselves by winning the American Wrestling Association Southern Tag Team Championship. However, their time as champions was short-lived, as they soon lost the titles to another team. After their championship loss, Eddie made a surprising decision. He turned against his own tag team partner, Tommy Rich. In the world of wrestling, this meant that Eddie was now considered one of the bad guys, also known as a villain or a heel. His betrayal led to a heated rivalry between the two, which quickly became one of the most intense feuds in Memphis wrestling history. One of their most unforgettable moments happened on live television. Eddie was being interviewed when he suddenly started insulting Tommy Rich. The audience was shocked, but things escalated even further when Tommy Rich appeared out of nowhere, and the two started fighting right there on live TV. Fans could not believe what they were seeing, and this moment became one of the most famous in Memphis wrestling history. In 1985, Eddie took his talents to another wrestling company called Mid-South Wrestling, which later changed its name to the Universal Wrestling Federation. It was during this time that he began calling himself Hot Stuff Eddie Gilbert, a nickname that would stick with him for the rest of his career. He also created his own wrestling faction, Hot Stuff International Inc., where he brought together a group of rising wrestling stars. Some of the wrestlers who joined his group included Sting, Ultimate Warrior, and Rick Steiner, who all went on to become some of the biggest names in professional wrestling. During his time in the Universal Wrestling Federation, Eddie took on more responsibilities outside of just wrestling. He became a booker, which meant he was in charge of planning matches, creating storylines, and deciding how the wrestling shows would unfold. One of his most famous creative ideas came in 1987 when he organized an event called the Battle of New Orleans. This was no ordinary wrestling match. It quickly turned into a wild, chaotic brawl that spread beyond the wrestling ring and into the entire arena. Wrestlers used anything they could find as weapons, including beer kegs, chairs, tables, and even a popcorn machine. Fans loved the mayhem, and it became one of the most talked about moments in wrestling at the time. Eddie's ability to create such exciting and unpredictable moments earned him a lot of respect, and in 1988, he won the Best Booker Award from the Wrestling Observer newsletter. In May 1987, Eddie's career took another big turn when he joined Jim Crockett Promotions after the company purchased the Universal Wrestling Federation. He was not alone. He brought along Missy Hyatt, Paul Heyman, and his brother Doug Gilbert. Once there, he teamed up with Rick Steiner to form a group called First Family, and together they feuded with Kevin Sullivan and the Varsity Club. Eddie also found himself involved in a rivalry with some of the biggest names in wrestling, including Ric Flair and Barry Windham. He joined forces with wrestling legends Ricky Steamboat and Lex Luger to take them on. At one point, he was even told that he would be joining the Four Horsemen, one of the most legendary wrestling factions of all time. Eddie saw this as a huge opportunity, but unfortunately, it never happened. Towards the end of his time with the company, Jim Crockett Promotions was rebranded as World Championship Wrestling. In April 1990, Eddie decided to leave World Championship Wrestling and move on to the next chapter of his career. In May 1988, before leaving World Championship Wrestling, Eddie had a brief but significant run in the Continental Wrestling Federation, a wrestling promotion based in Alabama. While there, he revived his old faction, Hot Stuff International, and continued to make an impact as both a wrestler and a booker. His ability to create exciting storylines and well-planned matches was widely praised, and during this time, he worked closely with Paul Heyman, who served as his assistant. The Continental Wrestling Federation had a national television deal on the Financial News Network, which gave Eddie's work network even more exposure. Wrestling journalists and fans admired his creativity, but behind the scenes, there were problems with management. These issues became too much for Eddie, and in September 1988, he decided to leave the company. Despite the ups and downs, Eddie Gilbert had already made a name for himself as a creative mastermind in the wrestling business. Whether in the ring as a wrestler or behind the scenes as a booker, he had an undeniable impact on the industry. One of his most talked about moments happened in Memphis in 1990 when he and his brother Doug pulled off a shocking stunt. As part of a wrestling storyline, they staged an attack on Jerry Lawler by running him over with a car and then fleeing the scene. The problem was, it looked too real. Fans watching on TV believed it had actually happened, and the police received a flood of calls. Lawler had to appear on television earlier than planned just to let everyone know he was fine and to make sure Eddie didn't get arrested. Eddie's career was full of twists and turns. He had a brief but influential run in ECW, where he not only wrestled but also helped shape the company's direction. At one point, he even owned part of ECW. When he left, the company began transforming into the extreme, hardcore style of wrestling that later made it famous. Eddie also had a controversial exit from the Global Wrestling Federation over a pay dispute. His time in Puerto Rico was also unique. There, he not only wrestled, but once had a bizarre match against a bear. His personal life was just as unpredictable as his career. Eddie was married 3 times, including a short-lived marriage to wrestling valet Missy Hyatt. Relationships in the wrestling business were never easy, and Eddie's marriages often ended quickly. In 1994, he gave an interview that was groundbreaking for its time. Wrestling was known for keeping secrets, and it was rare for wrestlers to talk openly about what happened behind the scenes. But Eddie was one of the first to do it, setting the stage for many others to later share their own experiences. Despite all the ups and downs, Eddie had a deep love for wrestling and his fans. He never saw himself as too big or too important to talk to them. He was known for staying long after shows, signing autographs, and giving advice. One young fan once told Eddie that he wanted to be a wrestler. Instead of brushing him off, Eddie took the time to give him encouragement, telling him to work hard, study the greats, and never give up. That kid grew up to become an independent wrestler and often credited Eddie as his inspiration. Another time, while wrestling in Puerto Rico, Eddie noticed a devoted fan who kept showing up at matches wearing a homemade Hot Stuff t-shirt, a reference to Eddie's nickname. One night, Eddie called him over and handed him a real piece of his wrestling gear as a gift. The fan was stunned, and that small act of kindness meant the world to him. Eddie also had a mischievous side. He loved to play pranks, especially on fellow wrestlers. One of his most famous pranks happened when he secretly switched a rival's entrance music to an embarrassing pop song just before a big match. The wrestler walked out looking confused as the crowd and the entire locker room erupted in laughter. These playful moments made Eddie both loved and unpredictable. He always kept things interesting. Eddie Gilbert may not have been the biggest name in wrestling, but those who knew his work understood how much he meant to the sport. He was a creative mind, a talented performer, and a man who lived and breathed wrestling. Even though he never reached the heights of some of his peers, his influence was felt by many who came after him. His work in ECW helped shape a new era of wrestling, and his passion inspired future wrestlers. His life was filled with ups and downs, but through it all, Eddie remained true to what he loved. Wrestling was in his blood, and that passion made him unforgettable. Eddie Gilbert's journey through the world of professional wrestling was one of immense talent, passion, and controversy. From his early days growing up in a wrestling family to his rise through the ranks of the industry, he demonstrated an undeniable love for the sport. His skills in the ring, combined with his sharp mind for storytelling and booking, made him a force to be reckoned with. However, his career was often overshadowed by personal struggles, backstage conflicts, and legal troubles that kept him from reaching the heights many believed he was destined for. Despite the setbacks, Eddie's impact on wrestling cannot be ignored. He played a key role in shaping the careers of future legends, created memorable storylines, and left behind moments that fans still talk about today. His ability to reinvent himself, whether as a beloved hero or a hated villain, proved his deep understanding of the business. He had a knack for captivating audiences, making them invest emotionally in his matches and feuds. Yet for all his brilliance, his demons caught up with him. The pressures of the wrestling lifestyle, combined with his struggles with substance abuse, took a heavy toll on both his personal and professional life. By the time of his passing in 1995 at the young age of 33, he had become a cautionary tale, a reminder of how the wrestling industry can be both a dream and a nightmare. Even in death, Eddie Gilbert remains a fascinating figure in wrestling history. His contributions to the industry, his ability to stir controversy, and his undeniable charisma make him an unforgettable character. Some remember him for his wrestling mind, others for his troubled path, but no one can deny that he left left a lasting mark on professional wrestling. As we reflect on Eddie's life, it's clear that he was more than just another wrestler. He was a visionary, a rebel, and a performer who gave everything to his craft. His story serves as a reminder of both the glory and the dangers of the wrestling world. Whether he is remembered as a hero or a tragic figure, one thing is certain: Eddie Gilbert's legacy lives on, etched in the annals of wrestling history.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we have the Crusher with us right now. And, Crusher, what's new with you?
Same old thing, George. No question about it. After seeing these couple bums wrestling here, that I'm way out ahead of the field as far as wrestling goes today. No question about it. I'm the greatest wrestler around today. What's that bum doing with that one finger up here? Come up here for an interview and the bum's giving me one finger.
The Crusher, tough as nails, drank beer like water, and could brawl with the best of them. He was on top of the wrestling world. But then came the downfall. It wasn't a rival in the ring that brought him down, but something much crueler: his own health. We're exploring the tragic decline of the Crusher, the surgeries, the illnesses, the fight to the very end. It's a tough story. Now, if you love old school wrestling, you've definitely heard of him. He was a massive star in the AWA and had a career that lasted for decades. The Crusher once drank an entire keg of beer in one night and still flexed for the crowd. That's the Crusher in a nutshell. Larger than life, cocky, and pure entertainment.
240 pounds from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Crusher Lasowski.
But like any legend, the Crusher's career had its fair share of debates and even a little controversy. Some things about his wrestling style and persona might not work in today's world, and we're here to break it all down. So let's get into it. The Crusher was known for being a tough guy. His wrestling style was hard-hitting, aggressive, and sometimes a little too real. Wrestlers use the term stiff wrestling when someone hits harder than usual, and the Crusher was the definition of that. He didn't just fake punches, he landed them. His moves were rough, his strikes solid, and if you stepped into the ring with him, you knew you were in for a real fight. Some wrestlers loved it because it made matches look intense and believable. Others, not so much. Some said he was too uncooperative in the ring, refusing to sell moves or being too aggressive. There are even stories of wrestlers who were hesitant to face him because they knew they'd be hurting afterward. Was this intentional, or was it just his natural style? Back then, wrestling was about looking as real as possible, and fans loved that hard-hitting action. So at the time, this wasn't seen as controversial. It was just the way things were done. The Crusher blurred the lines between fiction and reality more than most. His persona was that of a beer-drinking, tough-as-nails brawler, and he lived that way outside of the ring too. He was known for showing up at bars, taking on all challengers, and keeping up that tough guy image everywhere he went. Fans genuinely believed he was the same person in real life as he was in the ring, and that made him even more popular. But it also caused some problems. When fans can't tell the difference between a character and the real person, things can get messy. Some people challenged him in bars, thinking they could take him on. Other wrestlers might have had issues with him if they felt he was taking things too far. Today, wrestlers are much more open about their characters being just that, characters. But back then, keeping up the act was expected. So was this controversial? Not really at the time, but in today's wrestling world, it might be seen differently. Now here's something a lot of fans wonder about. How did someone as popular as the Crusher never win a major world championship? Despite being a top name for years, he never held the AWA World Heavyweight Championship or the NWA World Heavyweight Championship. That seems strange, right? Well, there are a few possible reasons for that. Some say his rough, stiff approach made promoters hesitant to give him a major title. Champions had to work with all kinds of wrestlers, and if someone had a reputation for being difficult to work with, that could be a factor. Another reason might be booking decisions. Wrestling is all about what promoters decide. Maybe they felt the Crusher didn't need a world title to be a big star. He was already selling tickets and drawing crowds without one. Also, he was huge in the Midwest, especially in the AWA. Vern Gagne, Zrenia, the AWA's promoter, liked to keep certain wrestlers in specific roles. Maybe he saw the Crusher as more of a local hero than a world champion figure. Was this a missed opportunity? Some fans think so. Could he have been a great world champion? Absolutely. But at the end of the day, he didn't need a belt to be a legend. Wrestling isn't just about what happens in the ring. It's also about what goes on behind the scenes. Some wrestlers knew how to play the game politically, making the right moves to get ahead. As tough as the Crusher was in the ring, his later years were marked by serious health struggles. He underwent multiple surgeries on his hips and knees, which left him with limited mobility. On top of that, he had a heart bypass surgery, which showed just how much his health was declining. Things got even worse in March 2005 when he had surgery to remove a non-cancerous tumor from his brainstem. Unfortunately, this surgery left him partially paralyzed. This was a devastating blow, making his final months incredibly tough. Along with these major health issues, he also suffered from diabetes and kidney problems, which only added to his struggles. He spent his final months in a nursing home where he had to be fed through a tube. It was heartbreaking for fans to see a man who was once known for his incredible toughness and strength reduced to such a fragile state. On top of his physical decline, the Crusher also suffered a huge personal loss when his wife, Faye, passed away in March 2003 after 55 years of marriage. Losing his lifelong partner must have been incredibly difficult for him, and it likely took an emotional toll on his already declining health. Even as his body failed him, the Crusher never gave up his fighting spirit. His son David once said that he would never stop working out until his death. That just goes to show the kind of man he was. Always pushing forward, never backing down. It makes his story even more tragic, knowing that his body simply couldn't keep up with his indomitable will. There's a bit of confusion surrounding the exact details of his passing. Some sources state that he passed away on October 22, 2005, due to complications from his brain tumor. However, the more widely reported date of his death is December 16, 2005, with congestive heart failure being the cause. Given his history of heart problems, the latter explanation seems more likely. Regardless of the exact cause, one thing is clear. The Crusher's final years were incredibly difficult. His body had taken a beating from years of wrestling, and the multiple surgeries, paralysis, and chronic illnesses all contributed to his decline. It was a tragic end for a man who had spent his entire life being one of the toughest wrestlers in the business. Even though his final years were filled with pain and struggle, the Crusher's legacy in wrestling remains strong. He was a true icon, a larger-than-life figure who entertained fans for decades. His toughness, charisma, and commitment to his persona made him one of the most unforgettable wrestlers of all time. What do you think about the Crusher's legacy? Let's talk about it in the comments. But before you click away, for the real fans, here we have a quick rundown of his epic career. Make sure you stay till the very end, because this is going to be good. The Crusher wasn't just born tough, he made himself into the brawler fans loved. Reginald Lasowski grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He was born on July 11, 1926, in a hard-working neighborhood where being tough was just part of life. As a kid, he was always on the move, playing sports, roughhousing with friends, and helping out at home. He was full of energy and never backed down from a challenge. By the time he was a teenager, people could tell he was different. He was strong, really strong. While other kids were riding bikes, he was lifting weights in his backyard, determined to get even tougher. He played football in high school, which only made him stronger. But deep down, he wanted more. He wanted to test his strength in a bigger way. Before he could chase that dream, he had to serve his country. Like many young men of his time, he joined the United States Army during World War II. His time in the military made him even tougher, teaching him discipline and how to push through pain. When he came back home, he took a job in construction. It was hard work, long hours, heavy lifting, and back-breaking labor. But for the Crusher, it was just another way to build his strength. Still, he knew this wasn't what he was meant to do. He had bigger dreams. In the late 1940s, he started wrestling at small local events. Back then, wrestling wasn't about bright lights and big productions. It was gritty and real, just a ring, two wrestlers, and a crowd wanting to see a good fight. And the Crusher, he fit right in. At first, he wrestled under his real name and worked hard to prove himself. He traveled from town to town, wrestling in small venues for little money. But he quickly realized that being strong wasn't enough. He needed to stand out. That's when he created the persona that would make him a legend. Enter the Crusher. He wasn't just a wrestler, he was a character. A beer-drinking, cigar-smoking, blue-collar tough guy who didn't take nonsense from anyone. He talked like the fans, acted like the fans, and fought like the fans wished they could. He made up wild stories about how he trained, carrying kegs of beer on his shoulders, breaking rocks with his bare hands, and even running through brick walls. Fans loved it. He wasn't just a wrestler to them, he was one of them. By the 1950s, he was officially known as Crusher Lisowski, and his career was taking off. His style wasn't fancy, but it got the job done. He didn't do high-flying moves or technical holds. He used pure power. His matches were like barroom brawls, and fans couldn't get enough. His big break came when he joined the American Wrestling Association, AWA. This was where he would make history. The Crusher took on some of the biggest names in wrestling: Vern Gagne, Component Placement Mad Dog Vachon, Larry Hennig. Fans packed arenas just to see him fight. They knew when the Crusher stepped into the ring, they were in for a show. One of his signature moves, the Crusher Claw, was simple but deadly. He would grab an opponent's head and squeeze like a vice, making them submit. But it wasn't just his wrestling that made him popular. It was his personality. He could make fans laugh, get them to chant his name, and keep them entertained. He was always cracking jokes about his strength, making himself seem larger than life. By the late 1950s, the Crusher had become a household name. Fans loved him because he wasn't some rich, polished athlete. He was a working-class hero. He made them feel like they were part of the action, and they cheered him on like one of their own. As the 1960s rolled in, the Crusher's career would skyrocket even more, leading to some of his most famous matches and rivalries. But it all started with those early years, lifting weights in his backyard, working tough construction jobs, and wrestling in small-town gyms before becoming one of the biggest names in wrestling history. And that's how the Crusher's story began. The 1960s were a golden era for the Crusher. He was already a big name in the American Wrestling Association, but this was the decade when he became a true icon. He was winning titles, selling out arenas, and proving night after night that he was one of the toughest wrestlers in the business. One of the biggest highlights of his career in the 60s was his partnership with Dick the Bruiser. These two were made for each other. They were rough, aggressive, and absolutely relentless in the ring. Fans couldn't get enough of their no-nonsense, smash-mouth style. Whether they were taking on the Vachon brothers or going toe-to-toe with Pretty Boy Bobby Heenan and his partners, the Crusher and Dick the Bruiser were always ready for a fight. Their matches were pure chaos. They brawled inside and outside the ring, throwing punches, slamming each other into the barricades, and giving the fans exactly what they wanted, an all-out war. Fancy wrestling moves? Not their style. They were all about brute force, and that's what made them stand out. But the Crusher wasn't just a tag team specialist. He was also a dominant singles competitor. He won multiple AWA World Heavyweight Championships, proving he could stand on his own. One of his biggest rivals was Mad Dog Vachon. If you liked hard-hitting, brutal fights, these two delivered. Their matches were filled with crushing holds, wild punches, and plenty of blood. It wasn't just wrestling. It was a fight to see who was the toughest. Another legendary rivalry of the 60s was against Vern Gagne. Zrania, the AWA's owner and top star. Gagne was a technical wrestler, the total opposite of the Crusher's brawling style. Their battles were a clash of styles, finesse versus raw power. And while Gagne might have been a master of holds and counters, the Crusher made sure every match was a war. As the 70s rolled in, the Crusher was still on top. Younger wrestlers were coming up, but he didn't change a thing. He kept wrestling the way he always had, hard, physical, and unapologetically tough. Fans loved him for it. He wasn't interested in flashy gimmicks or new trends. He was the Crusher, and that was enough. He and Dick the Bruiser continued their run as one of the most feared tag teams, winning the AWA World Tag Team Championships multiple times. They took on the Blackjacks, Baron von Raschke and Mad Dog Vachon, and the Texas Outlaws, which featured a young Dusty Rhodes. Every match was a battle, and the fans loved it. But the Crusher also had plenty of one-on-one rivalries. He went head-to-head with Nick Bockwinkel, one of the most arrogant and skilled wrestlers in the business. Their matches were full of drama, with Bockwinkel using his slick technical skills while the Crusher relied on sheer power. Their battles were some of the best the AWA had to offer. Another standout feud was against superstar Billy Graham. Graham was built like a tank, one of the most physically impressive wrestlers of his time. But the Crusher wasn't about to be outmuscled. Their matches were all about power, bear hugs, slams, and tests of strength. Neither man wanted to back down, and the fans ate it up. Outside the ring, the Crusher was just as entertaining. His interviews were legendary. He connected with the working-class fans like no one else. He would talk about drinking beer, listening to polka music, and getting into street fights. He wasn't playing a character. This was just who he was, and that's why the fans loved him. As the 80s began, the Crusher was getting older, but he wasn't ready to step away just yet. He kept wrestling well into the decade, still taking on both old rivals and new stars. The wrestling world was changing. The AWA was struggling as Vince McMahon's WWF started taking over, signing many of the AWA's top stars. But the Crusher stayed loyal to the AWA, the company that had made him a legend. He even faced some of the rising stars of the time, like Hulk Hogan and Jesse Ventura. He may have been older, but he could still hold his own. One of his last great rivalries was against Jerry Blackwell, a younger, stronger powerhouse who was becoming one of the top names in the AWA. Blackwell had the advantage of youth, but the Crusher never backed down from a challenge. Their matches were hard-hitting slugfests, just like the fans expected. By the mid-80s, the Crusher started to slow down. Decades of brutal matches had taken their toll on him. He wrestled less frequently, making special appearances and showing up to fire up the crowd. But even when he wasn't wrestling every night, he was still one of the most respected names in the business. By the late 80s, it was clear that the Crusher's time in the ring was winding down. Decades of brutal matches had taken a toll on his body. The injuries piled up, his knees, his back, his shoulders, all worn down from years of punishing battles. He wasn't the same unstoppable force he once was, but his heart was still in the fight. He wrestled his final matches in the late 80s and officially retired. But retirement didn't mean disappearing. Even after stepping away from wrestling, the Crusher remained a beloved figure, especially in his hometown of Milwaukee. He would make appearances at wrestling events, reunions, and autograph signings. Fans would line up for hours just to shake his hand, share a memory, or hear one of his legendary stories. He always had time for his fans. He wasn't just a wrestler to them, he was one of them. Outside of wrestling, he enjoyed his retirement years with family and friends. He stayed active, working out as much as he could, and embracing the simpler things in life. He loved polka music, good food, and of course, a cold beer. He was still the Crusher in spirit, even if his body wasn't as strong as it once was. But as the years passed, his health started to decline. The toll of a lifetime of wrestling caught up with him. His body, once seemingly indestructible, started breaking down. He underwent multiple surgeries on his hips and knees, struggling with mobility. Simple tasks that had once been effortless became difficult. He had always prided himself on his strength, so losing that was tough for him. In the early 2000s, his health struggles became more severe. He underwent heart bypass surgery, a serious procedure that highlighted just how much his body had been through. As if that weren't enough, in 2005, he was diagnosed with a non-cancerous brain tumor. Surgery to remove the tumor left him partially paralyzed. It was a heartbreaking moment for a man who had spent his entire life as a symbol of toughness and resilience. The Crusher spent his final months in a nursing home, where he was cared for by medical professionals and surrounded by his loved ones. His body had weakened, but his spirit never faded. His son, David, once said that his father never stopped working out until his last days. That was the Crusher, always fighting, always pushing forward, no matter what. On October 22, 2005, Reginald the Crusher Lasowski passed away at the age of 79. His official cause of death was listed as a brain tumor, though congestive heart failure was also a factor. The wrestling world mourned the loss of a true legend. Fans, fellow wrestlers, and even those who had never seen him wrestle knew what he had meant to the sport. He wasn't just another wrestler, he was an icon. His funeral was attended by many from the wrestling community, along with fans who had adored him for decades. People shared stories about his toughness, his humor, and his ability to entertain. He was remembered not just for what he did in the ring, but for the way he connected with people. Even after his passing, the Crusher's legacy has lived on. In Milwaukee, his impact is still felt. In 2019, a bronze statue of him was unveiled in his honor. Fans gathered to celebrate his memory, sharing laughs and stories about the man who had meant so much to their city. The statue captures his famous flexing pose, a reminder of the strength and charisma that made him a legend. His influence can still be seen in professional wrestling today. Many modern wrestlers have credited him as an inspiration. His hard-hitting style, his ability to connect with the crowd, and his larger-than-life presence set the standard for what it meant to be a true wrestling star. The Crusher's story is one of grit, passion, and perseverance. He was never the flashiest, never the most technical, but he was always the toughest. He gave everything he had to wrestling and to his fans, and in return, he became one of the most beloved figures in the sport's history. One of the things fans loved most about the Crusher was his larger-than-life personality. He was tough, but he was also funny. There are countless stories of him pulling pranks in the locker room, cracking jokes during interviews, and making fans laugh at his wild antics. One of the most famous stories involves a fan who bet the Crusher that he couldn't drink an entire keg of beer in one night. Now, if you know the Crusher, you know he didn't back down from a challenge. Not only did he accept the bet, but by the end of the night, the keg was empty and the Crusher was still standing strong, flexing for the crowd. The fan? Let's just say he wasn't feeling as good the next morning. Another classic story is about a time the Crusher was at a bar in Milwaukee. A group of guys who didn't recognize him tried to start trouble, thinking he was just some old guy at the bar. Big mistake. With one swift move, the Crusher flipped the toughest guy in the group onto a table, breaking it in half. The rest of the guys bought him drinks for the rest of the night, realizing they had just picked a fight with a wrestling legend. The Crusher was more than just a wrestler. He was a symbol of toughness, a blue-collar hero, and a true entertainer. He wasn't about glitz and glamour. He was about grit and determination. That's why fans connected with him so deeply. He was one of them, and he made them believe that hard work and resilience could take you to the top. His influence can still be seen in the wrestling world today. Wrestlers like Stone Cold Steve Austin and Kevin Owens have cited the Crusher as an inspiration. His ability to engage with the crowd, to make them laugh, cheer, and chant his name, set a standard that few could match. His promos were some of the most entertaining in wrestling history. Whether he was calling out an opponent, hyping up a match, or just telling stories, he had a way of making people feel like they were part of the action. One of the reasons the Crusher's legacy endures is because he represented the everyday person. He was the guy who worked hard, fought for what he believed in, and never backed down from a challenge. That's why people still talk about him today. He wasn't just a tough guy in the ring. He was someone fans could relate to. He was a family man, a hard worker, and a guy who never took himself too seriously. Even outside of wrestling, the Crusher is remembered as a cultural icon. Milwaukee has embraced him as one of its own, and his statue stands as a testament to his lasting impact. His famous beer-drinking, polka-loving persona is still celebrated, proving that his legacy isn't just about wrestling, it's about the way he made people feel. His stories are legendary. Fans still recall tales of him drinking entire kegs of beer, challenging people to feats of strength, and breaking tables in bars just for fun. He wasn't just a wrestler, he was an entertainer in every sense of the word. What makes the Crusher's legacy even more special is how it continues to be passed down through generations. Parents who grew up watching him tell their kids about his legendary matches, his wild promos, and the way he could electrify a crowd. His influence isn't just seen in wrestling. His larger-than-life personality has inspired countless athletes, entertainers, and performers in various fields. At the end of the day, the Crusher's story is about more than just wrestling. It's about perseverance, dedication, and the idea that if you work hard and stay true to yourself, you can leave a lasting impact. That's what he did, and that's why he'll always be remembered. He was a symbol of toughness, a blue-collar hero, and a true entertainer. He wasn't about glitz and glamour. He was about grit and determination. That's why fans connected with him so deeply. He was one of them, and he made them believe that hard work and resilience could take you to the top. His influence can still be seen in the wrestling world today. Wrestlers like Stone Cold, Steve Austin, and Kevin Owens have cited the Crusher as an inspiration. His ability to engage with the crowd, to make them laugh, cheer, and chant his name, set a standard that few could match. Even outside of wrestling, the Crusher is remembered as a cultural icon. Milwaukee has embraced him as one of its own, and his statue stands as a testament to his lasting impact. His famous beer-drinking, polka-loving persona is still celebrated, proving that his legacy isn't just about wrestling, it's about the way he made people feel. The Crusher's story is one of grit, passion, and perseverance. He was never the flashiest, never the most technical, but he was always the toughest. He gave everything he had to wrestling and to his fans, and in return, he became one of the most beloved figures in the sport's history. Even though he's gone, his legend remains. Whether through old footage, stories passed down by fans, or the statue that stands in his honor, the Crusher will never be forgotten. He was and always will be the working man's hero, the tough guy who never backed down, and the legend who left an everlasting mark on the world of professional wrestling. And that's the story of the Crusher, his legacy, his impact, and why he's still remembered today. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with fellow wrestling fans, and subscribe for more amazing wrestling stories. Got a favorite Crusher memory? Drop it in the comments below. We'd love to hear it. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Fanatic Red, we're just about sick and tired. In the South, we do things a little bit differently down here.
I know you do.
You know something, there's been some old boys go down there in Georgia that go on a ride, they take a trip, and they don't come back.
そして黒い猛牛です。ブラックジャック・マリガン。
Blackjack Mulligan. It's a name whispered with respect and a little fear. Why? Well, standing at 6 feet 9 inches and weighing nearly 300 pounds, Mulligan was an arrogant cowboy with a black hat, a leather glove, and a signature iron claw that left giants gasping for breath. He was big, he was mean, and he had stories that sounded too crazy to be true. From winning the World Tag Team Championship in 1975 to becoming one half of the iconic Blackjacks. This man ruled wrestling rings, but with his crazy highlights came insane controversies. Fan or not, I think you deserve to know this. One of the most shocking moments in Mulligan's life happened during a match in Boston in 1971. He was up against Pedro Morales, who was hugely popular, especially among the Latino community. Mulligan played the role of the villain perfectly, using dirty tricks to beat Morales down. The crowd was already fired up, but when Mulligan refused to end the match and kept attacking Morales, things got out of control. A fan in the audience, furious at what was happening, jumped over the guardrail and stabbed Mulligan in the leg. At first, a lot of people thought it was just part of the show, but when blood started pouring down Mulligan's leg, it became clear that this was real. The knife wound was serious, and doctors later said that the blade had missed a major artery by just millimeters. If it had cut any deeper, Mulligan could have bled to death right there in the ring. To make things worse, the attacker had dipped the knife in pig fat, which caused a severe infection. Mulligan needed over 100 stitches, and he was out of action for months while he recovered. The fan who attacked him was never arrested because security thought he was part of the show. After this incident, wrestling events in Boston changed their security policies, adding more barriers and checking fans for weapons before they entered the arena. All of this was too sad, but you can't really sympathize with him. Why? Well, here's the reason. Another one of the bigger scandals of Mulligan's life happened in 1989 when he and his son, Kendall Windham, got caught up in a counterfeiting scheme. They had somehow gotten involved in printing and selling fake $20 bills. They thought they were making a deal with buyers, but they were actually talking to undercover federal agents. When they showed up to complete the deal, they had suitcases filled with over $1 million in counterfeit cash. The authorities arrested them on the spot, and the case made headlines. Mulligan later admitted that this was one of the biggest mistakes of his life. He blamed financial troubles for his bad decision, saying that he was desperate for money and thought this was a way to fix his problems. He pleaded guilty in 1990 and was sentenced to 2 years in federal prison. After serving his sentence, Mulligan tried to rebuild his life, but the scandal followed him for years. He later said that he felt ashamed for letting down his fans, his family, and himself. Even after retiring from wrestling, Mulligan's name came up in legal trouble again. In 2015, he was mentioned in a WWE lawsuit over concussion-related injuries. He had planned to sue the company, but WWE filed a lawsuit first, claiming that he had no case. The legal battle didn't go far, and the case was eventually dismissed in 2018, after Mulligan had passed away. It was a small footnote in his life compared to the other wild stories he was involved in, but it showed that his wrestling career had taken a toll on his health, like many other wrestlers from his era. As a former Marine and football player, Mulligan had a reputation for settling problems the old-fashioned way, with his fists. He didn't go looking for trouble, but if it found him, he never backed down. Over the years, some of his fights became just as famous as his matches.
Andre wasn't a real nice man. I mean, everybody thought Andre was a very nice guy. He wasn't a nice guy. He had a mean streak. And he was very arrogant. You got to remember something. I was the one that worked with Andre when they brought him over.
One of the wildest stories about Mulligan involved Andre the Giant. Now, Andre was one of the few men who actually made Mulligan look small. The two of them wrestled each other often, but outside the ring, they were usually friendly. One night, however, things took a turn. According to wrestler Manny Fernandez, the three of them were having drinks after a show, playing a card game. Everything was fine until something set Mulligan off. Without warning, he reached across the table and punched Andre right in the face. The room went silent. Andre rubbed his chin, let out a deep chuckle, and said, "Oh, okay, boss. We fight now." And just like that, the two giants started swinging at each other, knocking over tables, chairs, and anything in their way. Some say the fight even spilled into Fernandez's apartment. When it was all over, there was no clear winner, but neither man backed down. Some people say Andre held a grudge after that, while others claim they laughed it off. Either way, it was one of the most famous fights in wrestling history. Another time, Mulligan had a run-in with Ole Anderson, a wrestler known for his short temper and sharp tongue. In the early 1990s, Mulligan was working behind the scenes in WCW when he overheard Ole bad-mouthing Eric Bischoff, who was quickly moving up in the company. Mulligan didn't like the way Ole was talking, so he stepped in and without hesitation, knocked him out cold with a single punch. Ric Flair, who was there at the time, said this wasn't the only time Mulligan put Ole in his place. Apparently, he had confronted him multiple times over the years, showing that even the toughest guys had to watch what they said around Mulligan. Since Ole wasn't exactly popular in the locker room, Mulligan's knockout punch was almost seen as something everyone had been waiting for. Then there was the time Mulligan went toe-to-toe with Harley Race, another legendary tough guy in wrestling. Harley was an 8-time NWA World Champion and had a reputation for never backing down from a fight. One night in the late 1970s, Mulligan and Harley got into an argument in a hotel room. Things got heated, and before anyone knew it, Mulligan threw a punch that sent Harley flying between two beds, getting him stuck between the mattresses and box springs. The two started wrestling on the floor, throwing punches and trying to overpower each other. Other wrestlers rushed in and managed to pull them apart, expecting round 2 to start at any moment. But surprisingly, Harley let it go. No one knows why, but maybe he figured Mulligan had earned his respect. Whatever the reason, the fight never continued, but it became one of the many legendary stories about Mulligan's toughness. These were just a few of the fights Mulligan got into over the years. Ric Flair once mentioned that Mulligan had punched Andre the Giant on another occasion as well, just to prove he wasn't afraid of anyone. There were also stories that he almost got into a fight with Lex Luger in the early 1990s because he didn't like Luger's attitude. But instead of throwing punches, Mulligan just walked away from his job before things got out of hand. Even though wrestling was full of tough men, Mulligan's fight stood out because of the size of his opponents and the way he handled himself. He wasn't just acting like a cowboy, he really was one. Back in Mulligan's day, wrestling was different. A lot of wrestlers had backgrounds in amateur wrestling, boxing, or even the military. Fights outside the ring weren't unusual, and many wrestlers saw them as a way to earn respect. Wrestling journalist Dave Meltzer once said that back then, if a wrestler got attacked by a fan, it was almost a compliment. It meant they were doing their job well as a bad guy. Mulligan fit right into that world. He was loyal to his friends, but if someone crossed him, he didn't hesitate to let them know. Despite all the controversy and trouble, Mulligan managed to turn things around later in life. In 2006, he and his former tag team partner, Blackjack Lanza, were inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame. It was a sign that the wrestling world had forgiven him for his past mistakes. He also wrote a book about his life called True Lies and Alibis in 2007, where he shared his experiences in wrestling and beyond. In 2012, he became an ordained minister, showing that he was looking for redemption in his later years. It seemed like he had finally found some peace after a life full of chaos. Sadly, our boy passed away in 2016. He will forever be missed for his entertainment and the substance he brought to the ring. As a tribute to his vivacious personality, here is a quick rundown of his epic career. Robert DeRoy Wyndham, better known as Blackjack Mulligan, was a man built for tough battles. Born on November 25, 1942, he had a strong, towering presence that made him stand out wherever he went. Before wrestling, he had dreams of making it big in football. He played at Texas Western College, now the University of Texas at El Paso, and even got a shot at the pros, trying out for teams like the New York Jets, New Orleans Saints, and Denver Broncos. But life had other plans. Before all that, he also served in the U.S. Marine Corps and spent time in Guam. When football didn't pan out, he found his way to wrestling, thanks to a push from his friend Wahoo McDaniel. Blackjack took the advice and started training. At first, he learned the ropes in Texas with Joe Blanchard and later polished his skills under Vern Gagne. Wrestling suited him. He was a big, tough cowboy, exactly the kind of guy who could put on a great show in the ring. In 1970, Blackjack packed his bags and headed to Japan for a wrestling tour. Teaming up with Larry Hennig, they won the IWA World Tag Team Championship, though they lost it a few weeks later. That didn't slow him down. A year later, he joined WWE, and that's when Blackjack Mulligan was born. He wore black trunks, a black hat, and a black glove, and he used his signature iron claw move to dominate his opponents. With the Grand Wizard as his manager, he quickly became a top contender. He even challenged champion Pedro Morales. But then something crazy happened. One night in Boston, a fan attacked him with a knife, slashing his leg so badly he needed hundreds of stitches. Gorilla Monsoon caught the attacker, but the police thought it was all part of the act and let him go. Blackjack had to step away to heal, but he wasn't finished yet. Once he recovered, he teamed up with Blackjack Lanza to form the Blackjacks, a team that struck fear into their opponents. They won multiple tag team championships, including the WWF World Tag Team Championship in 1975. But Blackjack wasn't just a tag team guy. He made a name for himself as a singles competitor too. He won the NWA United States Heavyweight Championship and even teamed up with Ric Flair to win the NWA World Tag Team Championship. One of his biggest rivalries was with Andre the Giant. They fought all over the country in different wrestling promotions. When their feud reached the WWF in 1982, Blackjack admitted that Andre's strength was beyond anything he had ever faced. By 1984, he was back in the WWF full-time. He even had his own interview segment called Blackjack's Barbecue, a rival to Roddy Piper's famous Piper's Pit. In 1986, he wrestled under a mask as Big Machine, teaming up with Andre and Bill Eadie. Their team took on Bobby Heenan's wrestlers, and even guys like Hulk Hogan and Roddy Piper briefly joined their side. After that storyline wrapped up, Blackjack continued wrestling under his own name until he left WWF in 1987. Even after leaving WWF, he didn't slow down. He fought in Texas, taking on tough guys like Bruiser Brody and the Von Erich family. In 1987, he returned to Florida to battle the Funk Brothers and teamed up with Kevin Sullivan. His last match happened on May 23, 1993, at WCW's Slamboree event. He teamed up with Wahoo McDaniel and Jim Brunzell against Don Morocco, Dick Murdoch, and Jimmy Snuka. The match ended without a winner, but by then, Blackjack's place in wrestling history was already secure. Outside the ring, Blackjack wasn't just a wrestler, he was a businessman too. He worked as a wrestling booker and promoter, even co-owning a wrestling company in Texas with Dick Murdoch after buying it from the Funk family. In 2006, he and Blackjack Lanza were honored with a spot in the WWE Hall of Fame, with their old manager Bobby Heenan giving a heartfelt speech about how much they had meant to the business. But Blackjack's life wasn't always smooth. In 1990, he and his son Kendall got caught up in some serious trouble. They were arrested for making fake $20 bills, and when the authorities investigated, they found nearly $500,000 in counterfeit money. Both of them took a plea deal and ended up serving 2 years in federal prison. In 2007, Blackjack wrote a book called True Lies and Alibis, where he shared wild stories from his life and career. Later in life, he found faith and became a born-again Christian. In 2012, he was ordained as a minister and spent his remaining years spreading his beliefs. In 2015, he got into a legal battle with WWE over the head injuries he had suffered during his career. He was part of a lawsuit with other former wrestlers, but the case was eventually dismissed in 2018, 2 years after his death. His final years were tough. In October 2015, he suffered a heart attack and was hospitalized. After months of health struggles, he passed away on April 7th, 2016. He was laid to rest at the Florida National Cemetery. Blackjack Mulligan was more than just a wrestler. He was a fighter, a storyteller, and a legend. His towering presence and larger-than-life personality made him unforgettable. Even years after his passing, fans still remember him as one of the toughest, most charismatic wrestlers of his time. And that's the story of Blackjack Mulligan, one of the toughest, most controversial, and downright unforgettable figures in wrestling history. From his brutal matches and wild backstage fights to his legal troubles and eventual redemption, his life was nothing short of legendary. Whether you saw him as a hero or a villain, there's no denying that Mulligan left a lasting mark on professional wrestling. His legacy lives on through his family, his stories, and the impact he had on the sport. If you enjoyed this deep dive, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more incredible wrestling stories from the past. Got a favorite Mulligan moment? Drop it in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.